It's a pleasure to speak with you, Mark. Mark Saban, by the way, is going to be the Zurich Lecture Series presenter in Zurich in October 2019. This is our 10th Zurich Lecture Series event, so it's an anniversary of sorts, and we're very glad to have you come to share with us.
Well, I'm very excited and very pleased to have been offered the opportunity to do so.
So why don't we begin, Mark, by just tell us a bit about yourself. How did you come to Jungian analysis? What is your background, your training? Yeah,
well, I'm not one of these people. I'm not a sort of cradle Jungian, as it were. I didn't read Memories, Dreams, Reflections when I was 4 years old or anything like that. I came to it fairly late, actually. I was, and indeed, I came to depth psychology fairly late. I was, for many years, I was always interested in the kind of things that you might expect a Jungian to be interested in. I was interested in myth, I was in fairy tales, I was interested in the imagination. But I studied classics at Oxford, and I then went immediately into working as an actor. So I became an actor and performer for many years, so about 15 years. Mainly theatre stuff. I did one film. I can be seen in Shakespeare in Love if you look closely.
Oh, really? Oh, I like that film very much. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm actually Lady Capulet in the play within the play, as it were. So next time you watch it, you'll have to look out for it.
I'll make a point of that.
Yeah. But that was the only film I did. Mostly I did theatre. I did quite a lot of Shakespeare. And a kind of a very sort of physical theatre sort of stuff as I say, for about 15 years. But towards the end of that period, I think I was slightly losing my faith in it, in myself within it, really. And I was starting to think there's more to me than this, I think is what is the way I would describe it. I felt that there was something missing somewhere. And I was in, as it happens, I was in a pantomime in Los Angeles, of all places, which I was doing.
Hollywood.
Yeah, it was a strange production, a British style pantomime, and of course the Los Angelinos had no idea what to make of that at all. But the production starred Zsa Zsa Gabor, actually, as the fairy godmother. But
oh, wonderful.
Yeah, well, it wasn't quite as wonderful as it sounds. But I was in a bookshop in Los Angeles, and I picked up the Thomas More book, Care of the Soul. And that's fascinating. I was fascinated by the approach. I was fascinated by the content. And so I immediately started reading. I immediately started reading James Hillman. Actually, that was where that took me straight away. And of course, the more I read Hillman, the more I realised that I needed to read Jung, because Hillman, of course, refers to Jung a fair bit. Not perhaps as much as he ought to, but he does talk about Jung. So that led me in that direction. And what I also started feeling fairly quickly, I absolutely gobbled up Hillman and started reading Jung, and I realized that in order to have any real understanding of this, I needed to go into analysis myself. So that's what I did. I researched, tried to find a Jungian analyst that was the most kind of Hillmanian that I could find in London, and I think I did fairly well at that. But I fairly quickly started thinking, actually, maybe this is something I'd like to do. This is something I could do, something that really excites me, that fascinates me, and which I'd like to pursue. And I could begin to imagine myself doing it. So eventually, many years later, having trained with the independent group of analytical psychologists in London, I came out the other end as a Jungian analyst.
So the independent group is classically oriented.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
It has a kind of, I mean, it is mostly, I think it would be a fair description. There are people at the more kind of archetypal end. There are some people who one might describe as more down the developmental end, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good mixture of different approaches, really.
And which of those did you gravitate to?
Well, I certainly gravitated very much to start with to the archetypal end of things.
Mm-hmm.
And my journey since then has been a sort of drifting. I wouldn't say I've exactly drifted in the direction of the developmental school, but I've certainly drifted away from the archetypal school. I think I've found when I started practicing and started having clients and having difficult clients in particular, I started realizing that there was more to Hillman's sort of disdain for transference, counter-transference work. It seemed to me really wasn't good enough at the end.
Clinically quite weak, I think, the archetypal approach. Intellectually interesting, but
it's fascinating, but it doesn't quite work in practice. No, I found anyway. I mean, other people may have had different experiences, but that left me with an interesting question, which was what was going on there, because I've always been interested in the theoretical aspect of all this. And that question mark stayed with me as to what how do I account for this difference? How do I account for the fact that the archetypal school doesn't quite do it for me anymore? There's something else going on here that needs to be accounted for. And I think that actually has fed into the kind of work, the kind of research I've been doing, which has brought me to the writing of these lectures and the book, which sort of goes with them.
Yes, well, let's go into that bit. If you could just give us some tidbits, something to whet the appetite for what you're going to bring us in Zurich. The title of your lectures, if I've got it right, there's a quotation from Goethe, alas, two souls.
Two souls, alas, yes.
Two souls, alas, yes. So this kind of division, and Jung's, and then you're looking at Jung's personality, number one and number two, and how this eventually created or went into the creation of analytical psychology. That's your general topic, I guess. What are you going to say about all that?
Yeah, well, that's more or less it, and that certainly accounts for the kind of first half of what I'll be talking about. Just to give you a little bit of an intro, I mean, I started this because I wanted to write something about the opposites in Jung, or the problem of the opposites, as Jung calls it. And as you know, he refers to the opposites. I don't think he ever wrote anything without talking about the opposites in it somewhere. So it's a pretty prevalent topic in Jungian psychology. And yet, it seemed to me I couldn't work out why no one had written a book about the opposites. Just concentrating on that problem. I fairly soon discovered why no one had written a book about it. But it's an enormously difficult topic, and of course, I head off in the direction of in a sort of philosophical direction, because the idea of the opposites is already a kind of philosophical idea. And I went off with Aristotle and Heraclitus and Hegel and Schelling and then I realized I was so far away from Jungian psychology that there was no way back. So I then retraced my steps and started thinking about this as a problem, and wondering where it had come up for Jung, I suppose, was the question. Because increasingly, I think the more I look at Jung psychology, the more apparent it is to me that everything in Jung psychology has its kind of basis in Jung's experience somewhere. If you can't find it in Jung's experience, then it's not likely to be a particularly important thing for Jung. And in effect, that's what he means when he talks about his psychology being empirical. He means that he's lived it. He's done it. He knows this because he's been
much based on experience.
Yeah. And he, you know, and of course he then, when he goes into the collective works, he disguises that in all sorts of ways, but it's certainly there. And the place I went to for this question of the opposites was the first 3 chapters of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where he talks about this extraordinary experience of having these 2 personalities, as he calls it, and the difficulties he had with having 2 personalities. And it's very striking there that he says very clearly that this wasn't a pathological, you know, he's kind of heading off Winnicott in advance, as it were. He's saying this was not a pathological experience. This is something that we all share. Now,
well, this essay by Winnicott, when Winnicott reviewed Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and he talked about Jung's problems, psychological problems, his childhood psychosis, his schizophrenic tendencies, and so on. He wrote a very interesting article about that, published in the Journal of Analytical Psychology a few years ago, and that's really what enticed me to invite you and to bring you to Zurich, because I found that the distinctions you were making there between the way Jung understood this problem of 2 personalities and imagination and the way Winnicott did was essentially very different, very important to make that distinction.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what I was trying to highlight there was that the kind of psychoanalytic model of the psyche was really very, very different from Jung's model. And this was not a kind of polemical attempt to say, therefore, we should have nothing to do with psychoanalysis. But you know, my conclusion was that unless we can see the differences between the 2, and they're very apparent, I think, then you can't even begin to have a conversation, you know, between the 2 camps, as it were. So as long as one just assumes that they're roughly the same, then you're going to get into all sorts of tangles, really, and that's in effect what Winnicott does when he tries to approach Jung's psychology. He doesn't, you know, he can only bring to it this psychoanalytic approach, which doesn't fit the bill, really.
I get the sense from some of the things you've said or written that you take a critical stance towards some of the deficits in Jung's psychology. Let's say the one-sidedness, the emphasis on the inner world, the intrapsychic, as opposed to the interpersonal, interactive. Is that going to be a theme in your lectures?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's really where I kind of end up. I mean, I having looked at the 2 personalities, having followed the idea of the 2 personalities through into Jung psychology, and it seems to me very clear that idea of these 2 different aspects jostling in tension with each other, and when brought together in a creative way, enabling transformation. That idea is absolutely central to Jung's concept of individuation. That's really what individuation is. It's a constant process of avoiding one-sidedness, bringing in the other, and so on.
The other, yeah.
And that if you look at things like the transcendent function, if you look at the importance of active imagination as a bringing together of conscious and unconscious, if you look at introversion, extroversion, the typology, all that stuff engages this whole question of, you know, what he calls the problem of the opposites, but which is always this kind of actual wrestling between different apparently opposing aspects, which need to be somehow brought together. And when they are brought together, that's when the interesting thing happens. That's when the new thing can happen. You can move on. That seems to be fundamental to Jung psychology. But I also noticed that there was a strong, you know, if one looks at it from this point of view of the 2 personalities, personality number 1 for Jung is definitely a kind of outward-looking relational aspect of the psyche. especially in contrast with personality number 2, which and Jung emphasizes very powerfully this sort of inner aspect, the intrapsychic aspect of personality number 2. It's and the solitude that goes with that, and the idea of the secret. These are the things he really bangs on about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and elsewhere, as being crucial. And it seems to me that he's far more interested. And just falls generally much more, there's a general tendency in Jung to fall in the direction of personality number 2. That's the area that he's really comfortable in. And that's the area he's interested in, and that's the area he wants to explore. And I think that the effect of that has been historically. He himself, as we know, acknowledges that anyone's psychology is a subjective confession. So we would expect this to be the case in a way. That's Jung the man. That's the person he was. But this, as it were, this kind of psychologic of the two personalities insists that, yes, but what about the other side? What about that other bit? What about the outward-looking bit? What about this bit which is difficult for you? That's the bit that needs to be constantly brought in to play in order to enable this individuating process again. And it seems to me that Jung doesn't always follow through with that. He doesn't always allow for that. This sort of, as it were, bias in the direction of the inner tends to powerfully outweigh, and he finds all sorts of ways to avoid it. So in effect, he in many places he almost defines the idea of defines psychology as what is concerned with the inner. But it seems to me that that's cheating slightly, because you've left out the other there. You've left out the outer, And of course, this is important when we think about psychotherapy, because it's, the process of psychotherapy is the meeting with the other. It is about relationship. It is about connection with the other. And Jung knew that. Of course, I'm not, Jung, all that is there in Jung's work on transference and countertransference. Yes. But it's not always consistent with everything else that he writes.
Do you think, we all have our own Jung. We all imagine him in his daily life, his professional life, his clinical work. Is your Jung a brilliant clinician? Is he clinically admirable, or would you criticize his clinical?
Well, you're asking all the right questions, Murray. This is precisely what the area that I'm kind of looking at the moment, and I've been reading some accounts of Jung's actual work with clients, Christiana Morgan. And also I read the biography of Peter Baines. It was interesting to see the way Jung dealt with Baines as well. And of course there are other examples as well. And it seems to me that there's a really interesting gap between what one reads about the way he dealt with these clients and what he says in Psychology of the Transference about this sort of this mutuality which goes on. He emphasizes, which is absolutely fascinating and of enormous value, I think. But in his actual practice, it's very hard to find any account which allows for that or highlights that. On the contrary, Jung nearly always seems to steer things in the direction of the archetypal and symbolic. And when he gets there, he kind of just dominates and provides the material. He provides the interpretations. He tells them, what the meaning of their dreams and active imaginations are, and there's very little room for this kind of mutuality that he talks about in Psychology of the Transference.
Yeah, mutuality is a tricky topic, isn't it? One knows that he was affected by his patients. He talks about that, and he gives some examples of it. And powerfully affected, and mutual influences and so on. He opened himself to quite a number of people. But he was such a dominant figure. He was Leo, he filled people who would, I remember Mario Jacobi saying years ago, he couldn't imagine being an analysis with Jung because Jung was such a big personality. There was no room for anybody else.
Yeah.
I don't know.
When you read these accounts, that's the impression you get. I mean, when Baines, right, he recounts his first session with Jung, and it's as if he's met a god. I mean, and one wonders about what the I mean, so stuff like transference, countertransference within that setting is going to be pretty difficult.
Very special.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing you about this. I know you've studied memories, dreams, reflections very carefully. You wrote a chapter in Why We Still Read Jung, that collection of essays on memories, dreams, reflections.
And that was the starting point in a way for this, Murray. That was
it? Yeah. I know you've studied Jung's biography very carefully, and I think really look forward to hearing some of your observations and where you're taking that, because in a sense, I think you're going to offer some clinical revisionism to at least the classical approach of dream interpretation, active imagination, bringing it back more into the interactive and interpersonal.
Yes, I think so. I think that's where it leads. Yeah. I think so. It's more of it's a kind of questioning, really. It's not that I have a kind of a sort of a new gospel of Jung to deliver, but I do think that if you question it with this, I mean, I think that the image that I find very helpful is this: the image of, and it's not my image, but the idea of binocularity, that you need. To get proper 3D vision, you need both eyes, and that moves you onto a whole different level, as it were. But you do need both of them, and they both need to be different. And that when the two personalities, or whatever they represent, come together, then you get that, and that's when things move forward. And I think that's I found that a very stimulating and useful approach to apply to Jung, as well as to anything else, really.
One final question. I didn't know that you'd been an actor in your previous life. Do you think that was a good preparation for being an analyst? I mean, to be improvising. Analysts have to improvise a lot, don't they?
Yes. Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm the person to say, but I mean, and you as an actor, you spend your life inhabiting other people's psyches and having to, get into them in order to do that. So there's certainly something there. I mean, it's interesting what you say about improvising, because I always felt that I wasn't very, improvising wasn't my strong suit. So I now find myself working with clients every day, and it's really it's all improvisation, and therefore very exciting, I think, and very the new is coming in all the time. And
that's very Jungian, isn't it? Jung says, "Leave your theories at the door when you walk into the room with a patient." There you are.
Yeah.
You have to improvise.
Yeah, you do. Again, not something that necessarily Jung did all the time, but it certainly says that we should, yes.
Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I really look forward to seeing you. Have you been to Zurich before, or will this be a first visit to Zurich?
No, it'll be a second visit, actually. I went to the old Jung Institute and did one of their sort of little weekly visits that you used to do. Which I very much enjoyed, but that was a while ago now. So I'm very much looking forward to returning.
Okay, great. I'm sure it'll be a wonderful experience for us, and I hope it will for you too.
Thank you, Murray.
Okay, Mark, great talking to you. See you before long.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.